And every time you turn your head like that, you will find that the muscles, the brain, your representation in space, your own movement, everything is formed with that movement. So all of these habits are not just about our skeleton. They're about how we perceive space. They're about how we use our teleceptors. They're how we use the ground. Where do we move? What spaces can we move into? So there's this really big picture there. And then he's saying, all of you, whichever way you've got your head now, could you turn it the other way? So some of you will be turning it to your more comfortable side, and some of it will be turning to your more non-habitual side, if you like. And begin to notice, how does all of you respond to that? Because that's what he's talking about when he's talking about the space around you, your internal space, the shape your skeleton's making, the connections you've made through. Turn it back to the right again, and just simply do that a few times, just turning your head and feel how much of you is involved. Because we know that the more of us that's involved, the better organised we are. And it's not through making ourselves move. It's not through making parts of us move. What you're simply assessing here is which parts of me are ready to go and which parts don't I involve. So you can scan all the way through, from your toes to your heels, to your knees, to your hips, your pelvis, your ribs, your spine, your shoulder blades, your shoulders, the base of your neck, your head. Is it free? Because what we're looking for is, once we get all of us in our image, that more possibilities can begin to emerge. Just as when we were doing the movement yesterday of showing that you could get longer on the side that you're weight bearing on when we were in prone, that you found that when you came up, that when you turned to that side, you had many options about where you could shift your weight. So something generalises in our system as we find more of ourselves, as we feel the space around us. And then come to a place where your head's turned to the right. And just see as you head in the same position you started it with, or through doing that movement of transferring your weight, feeling that you didn't have to push, that you could feel that gentle transfer of weight, that your head is organised into a different position. So notice where your weight is now with your head to the right. Where's the line through your torso? Does your weight feel more on the left side of your pelvis or the right side of your pelvis? Where is it in your belly, in your chest? Because you've got your head turned to the side, so we would expect it not to be midline, not to be exactly in the middle, but that you've had to shift your weight just a little bit. So I'll just read this. So my object so he's just done that little bit that Jane picked up. that it's easier to learn on your comfortable side. It's easier to learn. It's something we do all the time with people. We go with where they're already comfortable and then enlarge from there. So my object in doing that is to make clear to you through your sensation, through your feeling, why is it, how is it that you're more comfortable on that side than the other? That's a huge question for us, first of all, as practitioners to ask, so that we, understanding that more on ourselves, we can understand more why our clients are going to be more comfortable. What is it about how we can spread our weight on the floor? What is it about that our pelvis is probably a little bit freer there, even if it's not congruent with the way our head's facing? Our breathing is probably easier there. More of us is available to move. We've got a little bit more movability when our head's oriented that way. We've got more options available to us. So it's us really deeply understanding what it is that makes us more comfortable. Not just that we are comfortable, but how are we organising that it makes us more comfortable? And then he goes into a little bit of a talk, and it's a little bit what will, within that first talk he did about change, and he was talking about gold, and this time he's talking about water crystals. And he's saying water can be in many forms. It can be ice, it could be steam, it could be liquid, but it's always the same. There's something that's always the same. And we're really exploring what is it underlying all of the crazy things we do, or not so crazy, that helps us to be better organised. No matter what we're doing and what form we're in and what shape we're in. So then I'll just read this little bit. He's talking about walking. So he's talking again about all these individual differences, cultural differences, but that we're still all human beings. That doesn't change. Our basic needs don't change. So he's looking at walking and he's saying, we don't walk like the Japanese. We don't walk like the Indians. We don't walk like the Bedouins. We don't walk like Negroes who were born in Africa. We don't do that. The difference is enormous. But we all walk. It's a funny sort of thing in order to make you appreciate how different the outlook is. So again, you can, as I'm saying this, you could keep gently turning your head side to side. Don't feel you have to just stay stuck to the floor. So a funny sort of thing, in order to make you appreciate how different the outlook is, I was in Japan with Mia, and we were with Yutaro Kuro, who is the head of the Kyogan Theatre, and his wife loves him like a Japanese woman would love such a master or any other husband. And she told me that Yutaro has a lion's heart. He's not afraid of sleeping in a bed. He can sleep even in a bed. She can't. She can sleep only on the floor. So you can see that there is a difference between people who live in a country where earthquakes are as frequent as rain, and that they can't build houses unless they are paper or wood, so that if they collapse, they don't kill you. And if they begin to burn, you can run out with 2 buckets of water and put out the fire. People like that sleep on the floor. And for them, she finds that anybody who has the courage to sleep in a bed has a lion's heart, because she can't fall asleep when she lies on a bed. She hasn't learnt to adapt. She hasn't learnt to be able to have that same sense of safety or ease or comfort when she's lying on a bed. So we learn to sleep and lie in a bed and enjoy it. But this story always makes me think of when I've gone up to China, and I'm not very good at sleeping on very hard beds. I actually have to take a little bit of a cushion with me. So how do we adapt? How do we find comfort and ease and the ability to be responsive in new situations? How much can we adapt ourselves? How much can we adapt the environment to suit us? We walk differently from many other human beings. We speak a language which depends on our own ontogenetic personal learning, which never happens with any other animal in the world, even not with apes, with gorillas, or with chimpanzees at Stanford University. Even those don't learn a language spontaneously like we do, and depending only on where we are placed in the world. Then we learn to write, we learn to whistle, we learn to do a million things which look as if they are natural in that sense. And of course they are natural, but to us, human beings are not natural, which is idiotic, because writing is natural. Making computers is natural. Thinking mathematics is natural. Because if we were not natural, where would you have taken it? Where would you have learned it? Where from? The fact that we can, by our numbers, now influence the external situation and make some rivers polluted so that the fish die and do other things like that, that doesn't make us unnatural. It makes us only silly, but not unnatural. So, what else? We have a hairstylist. It's unnatural, isn't it? But it's human. You learn to do that. We learn to look and find our shape natural and comfortable. That's how we learn to know who we are. And if you change your posture a little bit, you find that you look strange to yourself and believe that people will consider that you were doing something artificial outside. Is that the only thing? What about mathematics? It doesn't exist in nature. In nature, it exists in human nature. And human nature is part of world nature. And therefore it exists in the human brain. So again, he's always constantly finding different ways to look at the same idea when he's asking these big questions. So can you see that when we want to get ourselves into that state where we become again a growing personality? So this is going back to that I am where I am and there's something in me that feels it's not good enough, or I want it to be better. There's something more that I'm looking for. It means doing something about ourselves from the moment we left off growing as a person and becoming only a social animal. From that point, we have given up our internal growth and our internal necessity. Because a baby, when he feels any way inconvenient, he makes such a thing. He cries so much that the people who care for him must do something about it. But when we grow up, we don't dare even to cry, and we swallow our misery and actually do nothing about it, or repeat the same mistakes to be miserable again the moment it wears off. So that is that somehow, somewhere, we have alienated ourselves to our own well-being, to our own responsibility of ourselves as a person, and become only a social being, an element in society which is extremely useful. It's just like I'm harping against habits, but we are trying to make only better habits, review the habits we have, and be able to pick every time a new one, which is better for my continuation of life with a better opinion of myself. In other words, an aesthetic appreciation of my own qualities, with my own dignity, my own freedom of choice, me being a real human being, having a free choice. Free choice, what does that mean? Who has a free choice? I have no free choice stopping talking now. I have no free choice. I can't stop talking. I have the free choice in a sense that what I say, the way I say it, the way I feel about it, the way I communicate to you, on that I have some sort of say of changing, and that at the moment is sufficient freedom. That's an extraordinary freedom. So, come back to your stomach if you've got come off your stomach. Place both hands somewhere around your head, finding a comfortable place, having your head to the right, so that now he's saying that it may not be easier to have it to the right. So we're turning it to the right now. We're making a choice for those who aren't as comfortable with their head to the right to help your learning, that this is not necessarily now about your convenience, but there's something here that you can learn if your head is to the right. So your hands somewhere around your head in a way that's more comfortable for you. And now you're going to begin to put your right hand and feel that you're going to stand all your fingers of the right hand on the floor as if to make a bell shape. So the fingers and your thumb will be on the floor. So the palm, you can think of your palm or the wrist being the top of the bell. And you're finding a way to get comfortable there. So your fingers are hanging down like a bell. So if he's saying hanging, that doesn't mean there's a lot of pressure on them. So what do you need to organise through the rest of your arm to allow your fingers to be comfortable in that position? How do you feel that you can get the idea that your fingers are hanging a little bit, touching just the tips of your fingers, your right hand only, and feel, is it uncomfortable to lie like that? How would you make it comfortable? And then he gives you a big clue here in the sense that you could lift your shoulder. So is there something about lifting your shoulder? And what is it, where would you take your elbow to make that more comfortable, that you could really have that bell-like thing? Would your elbow be on the floor? Would that make sense? Or would your elbow be in the air? What would make your arm feel lighter? Where could you feel that you could have those hanging fingers a little bit more? Would you have your elbow on the floor or your elbow in the air? So just explore that for a moment. Where do you want your whole arm to be? that would allow you to be comfortable with your hand in that bell-like shape. So then I'll come to the other end of the room so that you don't have to move or look at me behind you. And he does this little demonstration about, you know, if you wanted to hold your nose, would you keep your elbow really still or would you move your elbow to hold your nose? What would you do? If you were sitting and you were going to bring your fingers to your nose, would you keep your elbows still? And this is where he's brilliant. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I wouldn't do that in another position, keep my elbow on the floor and try and get into, I mean, you know, in some ways he would say it's a bit spastic, isn't it? Why would you do that? So again, how do you find a way? And he says this a little later on, but for some of you, this is already going to make it a little easier. For some of you, it's going to be easier if your left arm is down by your side a little bit. Because what has to happen to allow your shoulder to lift back, to allow your elbow to lift into the air? And this is what we're constantly doing sort of in ATM. We're in sensation. You know, I'm in quality, I'm in feeling my way, that my breathing is easy. And then part of me in sensation could be going, what would a skeleton do here? What would lighten my arm to get into this position? What have I already learned about that my weight would need to shift a little bit? That I'd have to maybe include more of myself in my image, so that if I'm doing this and I hit that point where everything gets a bit stuck, have I stuck myself to the floor at that point? But these are how we've got to keep applying all these principles, that the movement is what we're using to explore all these things. So once you've found that position, where your arm can be lighter, you're resting on your fingertips and on your thumb, in that bell, then you're going to, how do you lighten your arm a little bit further to bring your fingers and thumb together? And then they open and you go down again. So you lift, feel the movement through your shoulder blade. So the fingers are always hanging toward the floor. And you're finding this way to draw your fingers and your thumb together as you lift your arm a little bit more away from the floor. You're feeling this trajectory through you. Maybe this has got something to do with the lesson Lisa taught yesterday about where the weight might roll. And then, and some of you have already done this, but let's see with everyone, if you draw your right knee up, bring your right knee up closer to your chest. So leave your hand where it is, and just do that a couple of times, drawing your leg up and down. And how do you do that? because we've got your head to the right. Do you feel your belly being activated to bring your knee up and in closer to your chest? Do you feel your weight shifting? So once you've got your right leg up then in a comfortable position, does that make it easier for you to do this bell movement? How does that movement go through you now? What's happening in your shoulder blade, in your collarbone, in the base of your neck, in your head? Is your head stuck to the floor? Because again, remember, so much of what we're doing is to organize your head to be light. So does your head respond to this movement of lifting your arm? How can you explore? What questions are you asking yourself? To find this way of your fingers just hanging. And they just draw up and come together, and then they open again and go down. And they draw up. Is your other shoulder free? Is it in a position that's allowing this little bit of a roll? Could you change your position? So you simply start with that bell position, you lift up and you open the bell as you come down, and your fingers and thumb are resting on the floor again. And so where do you initiate that movement from? And again, this is a huge thing, isn't it? This idea of initiation. And this idea that if just a small movement happens centrally, the difference it can make to the range of movement I can do in my periphery. So where's your head going as you do this? Is your head rolling backwards? Or is your chin, is your chin going away from your chest and you're extending your neck as you do this bell hand? Or is there a possibility that your head could nod a little bit and you could flex your neck as you do this? And he says something really interesting. He said, if I just leave you doing this movement for an hour and you just stay in quality, you'll probably find it. Where it's difficult for people to find it on their own is they're not quite sure where to direct their attention, not quite sure what questions to ask themselves or what to investigate. And that's what we're learning to do as the practitioner. What are the questions? Where am I going to draw people's attention to? What am I going to get them to do? Is it their breathing that I could get them to pay attention to? Is it where their right leg is, that they could have it maybe a little bit more bent up or down? That they can make little adjustments. Because remember, the previous lessons to this, when we were doing all of the thing, there was something about being that your leg got lighter as well, wasn't there? No? There was something about this position. We were doing it differently, but we were still lifting the front arm and leg. So what do you recall of that movement that we were doing? No. We're not in exactly the same configuration, but it's the same principle that you're looking for again, of how you get your arm light, how that right leg is ready. It doesn't have to lift, but it's responsive. So would your right leg to do this be getting pulled a little bit toward you because your pelvis might be turning a little bit? And so we're not doing the big roll here. Huh? Your head staying on the floor if that's possible. But you're feeling this bell movement, that your arm is just so passive, really. It's like a pulsing again. So we were doing the pulsing on the other days with this gentle flexion, extension of your fingers, that you were beginning to feel that, how that influenced deep into your middle. So what is it again deep in your middle that needs to soften and mobilize to allow this bell hand movement? How do we keep applying these same ideas? Or is it that what we often do is with each ATM we come back and he talks about we're a tabula rasa again. It's like we're starting a little bit from ground zero again. And this is what's really important, I think, for you to be able to do great FI. This ability to really see, what are we looking for? What makes easier movement? Get something light, the weight needs to shift. All of me needs to be involved in that. Everything, every little bit doing its little bit. The importance of the mobility of my pelvis. And it's not that it has to do a big movement, but that it's there, it's ready to respond. The importance of this connection of your shoulder girdle into your upper torso, into the base of your neck. This importance of starting to find how I can change the shape through my middle. So keep going, and I'm just going to do a little bit more reading. So all of us have our own handwriting. I really love, he uses this analogy a lot, that it's something so individual about us that comes out of our structure, out of our function, out of who we are. And it's such an individual thing, and I think sometimes I think it's a bit of a shame that now everything's done on computer and there's no individuality to it. That such a profound way of expressing ourselves is really changing. And that we're all going to do it. And what we're interested in the Feldenkrais method is how within that individuality, which we'll always treasure, do we find some of these basic ideas that are going to allow any of us to feel more integrated, to feel more ourselves, to feel we have more possibilities. So you will see, I'm reading now, you will see by the time you allow yourself the same freedom to put your head to the left or the right, that your hand will produce a miraculous reorganization. Because in your hand, there is already most of the difficulties that any one of us has in their own life. Whether they are emotional, whether they are sensorial, whether they are thinking difficulties, whatever difficulty we have is in that hand already, the way that you use it and what you do with it. And when one has a look, you will see what we call free choice and learning. And anybody who does functional integration properly, as one day it will be done, I love this, everywhere in the world, because it is more fundamental and more essential for human beings to be able to do that than any other discipline alive today. In other words, our organisation, our growth is beyond criticism. It can be terribly bad, it can be primitive, and yet by paying attention to these things, to the quality of the movement, to feeling all of yourself as involved, feeling this ability to use the ground, that how do you get things light? At the end of the hour, everyone will find it easier to do. And they'll be doing it perfectly. And doing it perfectly for who? Only for yourself. You will feel someday that you have the means of doing it in any way you like, comfortably, easily, and you wouldn't know why there was such a difficulty. How would we get that? First, as it is now, you're trying to do it as if you do it with your hand. And I want you to do it, not that you do it with your hand. You do it, not your hand. Your hand is not your slave. And you are not you are not its boss. You have a say in your hand. You can cut it off if you like. But as far as functioning goes, activity, you and your hand are one whole thing. You see, you can't write with that hand at the table a letter without bringing your arse with it and your feet and getting to the table and using the other hand to take out the paper and taking something to get some way of writing and organising it so that the inclination of the paper and the distance from the eyes and the way you sit make it all possible. In other words, to make it as easy as writing, you must use yourself, not your hand. And if you use yourself, it is impossible to do with the hand without somehow involving the same parts of yourself that carry you to the table or to the piano or to go and open the case and to take out a violin, or whatever you do. In other words, it is difficult only to people who use their hand as if they bought it. If you use yourself to do it, it becomes extremely easy. Therefore, the more you involve yourself, your past, your future, your present, your aches and pains, your happiness, your memory, and the things you have forgotten, and by the way, slowly, you will realize that these movements actually do something. And this is the point in the lesson where he goes that you could bring your leg up to the side. And it's interesting. He says, how is it that one has to remind you that you have a right leg that can help you lift your hand? That you have a left leg that can help you to lift your hand? What position could it be in that could help? You have a left arm. You have a chest. You have a neck. You have you. You can see it has nothing to do, and now he's just making some comments on things that were very, that there was a lot of, they were doing a lot of this in the 80s. You can see it has nothing to do with the fascia. It has nothing to do with polarity. It has nothing to do with any other damn thing that you can think of. It has to do only with your alienation to your own self. That's all. Recover from that, and you will find that your hand is a marvelous instrument. So what are you finding? So go back for a moment, because for most of you it's looking so much easier. So is it still easier if you put your leg down again, your right leg? What have you transferred? Because we've been doing things that have sort of been helping the weight shift, helping you to include more of yourself. So does it make more sense now of how your arm can float to do this bell-like movement? There's some freedom through the shoulder girdle that maybe wasn't there before. And that freedom through the shoulder girdle only comes because your other shoulder is free as well. And your ribs can move relative to both your shoulders. And your head is free. And your pelvis is free. And then go back to bringing your leg up again. And again, you can have your left arm down along beside you. But really feel with your left arm down along beside you. Have you pushed it down? Or could you do it in a way that your left arm could be beside you, but it could be, shoulder could be closer up to your head? So again, that it's putting your left arm beside you. If you can feel it's difficult, do you keep your arm in that position, or do you go, if I shifted my left arm maybe a little bit away from me, maybe a little bit up, maybe a little bit down? What is it you've been learning through these years that when you feel you're a bit stuck, that you have to vary something, you have to change something a little bit? So anything that you do fast in learning will be slow in real action. Anything that becomes really nice and slowly done in learning removes all the friction, all the unnecessary parasitic movement, all unnecessary internal difficulties for the action. And then you can do it with the velocity that is beyond your imagination and the power that is beyond your imagination. So this is, again, one of the things. If you can do something really slowly, you can do it as fast as you like. You can see that in some people, they have done it by themselves, because if it weren't like that, the teaching would be worthless. Some people in other disciplines have done that. Some samurai have unimaginable power. Some judo men that I know have an absolutely incredible power over anybody they touch. They can do anything they like. If you met sometimes in your life a man like Nagaoka, like I did, that man has a power that feels like a church to move, and a lion wouldn't hit you harder and wouldn't throw you easier than he could. And if he had to do it, he could do it with a gentleness that you wouldn't know where it came from. And he wasn't the best there is, because there's always somebody better. Mifune was half his weight and could do better than he. So it's feasible by other ways. So this is what he's saying. People can become experts in their fields. But somehow they understand this ability to pay attention, to have all of themselves in an action. The interesting thing from our perspective is, do they know how they got there? Can they teach it to someone else, what they've actually done? And that to always remember these people he's talking about, these judo masters or tennis masters or anyone, has come through hours and hours and hours and years of practice, of honing their attention, honing their skill, so that when they're in action, they don't have to think about it. It happens. So now, just feel, if you come back to that position on your belly, right leg bent, left arm long beside you, how easy is it to lift your head there at the moment? Has your head got lighter? And I know we didn't check it at the beginning, but just get a sense of how light does my head feel? How far through myself do I feel my head? And when I lift it, do I lift it straight up, or how many different ways can I move my head? And it can be light. Can I be looking a little bit to the right and lift my head, or looking down a little bit or up a little bit? And how do each of those involve a slightly different weight shift, a slightly different organization? And find that bell hand position again, with your right leg bent up, so you can feel you much more deeply finding your flexors here. For most of you, your head is probably moved a little bit more to the right on the floor by doing these movements. And with that lightness in your head of lifting the bell, could you keep lifting your elbow up into the air, feeling your shoulder blade slides back, so you could feel you could rest your fingers on the hair above your right ear. But you're going to do the bell hand to get there. Feeling that weight shift, that you could bring your hand to very gently, so your elbow will be high in the air. And feel free to move your left arm anywhere you like to find this. You might want it long above your head. Some of you have got it there. So whatever will allow easy weight shift for you, that you can lift that bell hand, sweep it to find, and to really begin to feel, I find this lightness when I can really shift my weight more to my left side. And then once it's there, could you really gently feel you could just pull that hair a little bit? So you're going to use your fingers, you're not lifting your head, but you're just pulling the hair in the direction of the ceiling, and you release it. And you pull, so you're not lifting your head. You're not lifting your head. This is going to help you, if you don't lift your head, to feel what you can find maybe a little bit more in your shoulder, in your collarbone, in your upper ribs. And you're just gently pulling your hair in the direction of the ceiling. And again, really play with where you want that other arm to find a position where this can become easy. It's your learning. Some of you have found it's easier if your head's resting on your left arm. That's wherever for you. And then very gently, 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 could you feel that gentle pulling of your hair there could just begin to side bend your head a little bit? So that if your head was going to lift, it's going to be supported because we've been shifting your weight by everything that's under it, but that you could feel the joints of your neck have got a little softer. And they've got softer because your weight is supported further down on your right side. And you're finding this organization through your upper torso, that the shoulder blade can roll back gently. And feel, go back to, again, thinking, what ribs, what parts of me are touching the ground here? What parts of me are softening into the ground as I do this? Are these movements asking me to find different parts of me that can soften into the ground? And the more you involve yourself in the movement, the more you participate in that, the more you do the movement, the more of yourself must be involved in this very minor movement. So again, you know, it's approximations. It doesn't mean that your pelvis has to do the movement. But you're feeling, is my right foot in the image of this movement? Are my toes in the image? Have I left them out? My ankles? My hips? My back? My front? The underneath of my left arm? My fingers? Because this is what integration is. This ability that I do something and I feel everything ready to respond. Just a fraction as the movement goes through me. This is what it means to use all of yourself in movement. And that you're beginning to find, where do I stop it? What could I do? Is it my breathing? Maybe the area that I stop, maybe if I breathe there and soften it a little bit more into the ground. What are the strategies I've got? And roll to your belly again. How we started, your legs long, arms somewhere around your head. Head to the right. And just see, has anything got more comfortable to have your head to the right? And how do you know that with where your weight is? Is the weight, maybe there's more of you on the ground, the pressure's more generalized, there's not as many hard bits. How easy is it to lift your head at the moment? How much bracing or pushing do you have to do? And again, if you were going to lift your head, because again, this is what we do in FI. If I lift the head and I feel all of a sudden something pushes, could I change its trajectory? Could I take it off somewhere else so that I can shift the weight somewhere else? So it's not that I have to keep my head in one. Lifting it could mean I'm lifting it and turning to the left, or I'm lifting and looking up, or I'm lifting and looking down, or what options have opened up to you in where not just that your head could be lighter, but where it's possible to take it, and how much of you is ready to follow along for the ride. So just as we did we've been doing a lot of this, and then in Lisa's lesson yesterday, and we were looking at how rolling that ball and finding the ground, we took it into FI, how often lets us give up unnecessary work as we get the ground more. For many of us, it's in our belly. In our back. It's those places where we don't have that relationship between our flexors and extensors. This easy open and close, open and close. And so again in these lessons, he's looking a little bit more of developing this ability to mobilize your belly, but in a really soft way, soft way, because there's no point mobilizing your belly if at the same time your extensors aren't releasing, if you haven't got that relationship. So that's again where the work comes in, the effort. We experience effort when they're not working together. So as you're lying there now with your head to the right, and you started that gentle bell movement, just see, is it any easier? Is something different mobilizing? It can be really small. It doesn't have to be the whole movement. We're heading toward coming up to standing. So find a movement there that feels really aesthetically pleasing to you. So that it's you doing the movement. That's what aesthetically pleasing is. And could you begin with that movement? And it's a really interesting thing he asks here, because now he's really going to challenge people, and then he will bring it back again to do whatever feels easy for you. But could you imagine with that gentle bell movement that your pelvis could begin to lift away from the floor, as if someone was pulling you up by your pelvis? So the flexors are going to have to do this. So you're going to do the same bell movement now. He's beginning to ask, can you transfer that now to your middle, so that as you lift, your pelvis is going to lift a little bit, your back's going to get long, your belly's going to pull in, your head's going to get pulled down. And that could bring you up to standing. So now he sets out the big picture. How does your learning cope with that? You automatically go, no. He also says, because you can do it straight up, you could get your hands a little bit in push-up, if you like, and do this. Think of my belly lifting and, my belly rounding, my pelvis lifting, my head coming down. But then he also says, but we want this bell hand, so you're not allowed to take weight on that hand. So that means you can't come straight up. You've got to roll a little bit. Your pelvis is lifting, but not straight up. What would your legs have to do? And struggle, but struggle knowing what you're doing. Struggle well. And again, the moment you stop, feel what's happened. What have I left out of my image? What stopped moving? Have I pushed? Because again, it's not important at all that you can get up. You all know you can get up from the floor. And then change it to that you could still have your bell hand, but you can come up any way you like. Your individual way of making sense of this at the moment. So you've just got that very gentle bringing together and really feeling it's not this. It's all of you doing the bell. Your elbows free, your shoulders free, your head's free. I think these are wonderful opportunities, though, to really play around with frustration. And the thing is, you want reversibility. This is where the reversibility comes in again. I'm not going to get stuck in too much difficulty. I'm going to bring it back for where I am, where my learning is at the moment. Because what we're interested at the moment, at the end of the lesson, is how have you generalized that? What have you generalized? So not leaving you with, but to go back and find, where's the quality for me? Where's the bit where I found something about how I learn and how I can make it easier for myself? And I've found something about how movement can become easier. More of me can be in my image. And come up to standing. And really take your time. What does this lesson? Lessons are so different in what they can evoke in our organisation. Has this lesson made you more internal? That your internal world feels a bit more filled in, or external? Lots of people, this often will be a little bit more internal. But again, we're always looking for that reversibility, that I can have something more foreground in my attention. So maybe this is my internal world, or my right side might be more but I still have a left side. I still have the world around me. So this ability that our attention can keep moving, that do I feel more global? Do I feel more focused? But again, it's not just about being one. One can be more foreground, maybe at the moment. Have a walk around after this. So lessons are so different. Is this a lesson that at the end of I'd want people to talk about their experiences? Or are you in a space where you really want to be more with yourself and feeling what's happening? And we'll take our break.